Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to this evening's panel, Cinema as a Form of Social Protest. My name is Shona Foster. On behalf of BIPOC TV and Film, we're very excited to have this panel take place. BIPOC TV and Film is a grassroots not-for-profit organization dedicated to increasing the representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, both in front of and behind the camera. We have two exciting initiatives that we'd like to let you know about before we jump into things. We have version 3 of our BIPOC Kids TV Writing Bootcamp, which is a 3-month writing intensive taking place in January. And this initiative is to break writers into the kids TV genre through mentorship and writing your first original kids television script. We're going to be accepting 5 participants, and 10 spots will be dedicated to emerging Indigenous writers. We also have a drama writing intensive for Black and Indigenous writers, which will be starting in February 2021. And for this initiative, we have 8 participants who are going to be selected and who are on the verge of being ready to get into their first writer's room. Submissions for both of these initiatives open next month. And please follow our social media and sign up for our newsletter on our website in order to stay in the loop. I'd like to begin this evening with land acknowledgement. Today we are gathering from our homes across Takalondo and are grateful to be working on this land. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. These treaties and other agreements, including the One Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, are agreements to peaceably share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations, Europeans, and newcomers were invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect, peace, and friendship. We are mindful of broken covenants, and we strive to make this right with the land and with each other. We are all treaty people. Many come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation or generations past. I would like to all those of us who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, I honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. And now I'd like to pass it over to KILEY May, who will be moderating our event for this evening. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, Shona, I appreciate it. Sego sa gwego galandodo yogyats kanyake haga niwaga hujoda danu nahola niwagi taloda ji yanjain dakwa oswego nidawageno. Hi everybody. That was my Mohawk introduction. I was just explaining that I belong to the Mohawk Nation, as well as the Turtle Clan. I am Haudenosaunee, Mohawk, and I come from 6 nations. Oswego is where my home is, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much to BIPOC TV and Film for hosting another important conversation, and for all the ally work that you do, as well as their partnership with the Toronto Film School. So thank you all so much. Today on our panel, we have some Indigenous filmmakers, as well as screenwriters, actors, directors, producers, a wonderfully talented group. And I'm really proud and glad to be here with you tonight and have this conversation. So we have Gawanahele, DEVERY Jacobs, we have Tim Myles, and we have Jeff Barnaby. Do you just each want to say hello if you want to?
Hey everybody, for having me.
Hey, hello, my name is Tim Myles. I am from the Mwapakek First Nations in Newfoundland, and Wilalin, thank you so much for having me.
Jeff Barnaby, director, writer. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I was thinking so much about this conversation and how much that, I feel as Indigenous people, at least what I've seen in my community, is always doing the work, always doing activism or education. We have so much history of resistance for all of our communities. I feel like as Indigenous people, we have storytelling interwoven into our identities and our culture. And we use storytelling to pass on teachings and knowledge, but as well as for entertainment. And we use stories to record agreements and history, and even for governance and politics. So as artists and actors and filmmakers, I feel, maybe you feel the same way, that we kind of understand the potential for political activism in our work, such as protecting our language and culture, or defending our traditional rights, speaking to our history and the agreements of the lands, and of course, all of the things that we've survived and been through, oppressions, genocides against our communities, in so many forms. And, you know, now we're living in a time and an era of so much intensified, you know, political activism and people using their voice, and this merging together and overlapping of all of these different social rights movements. But specifically for Indigenous communities, we have, you know, truth and reconciliation and restorative justice work that's happening. So bringing it into, you know, our work as filmmakers, producers, actors, directors, when did you all first of all, encounter Indigenous cinema? You know, when did you realize that, or what was the first thing you saw, whether it's movie or a TV show? And it can be something like, you know.
Nobody wants to go first. The first thing that I saw was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Chief.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the first thing that I saw. And then the thing that I remember seeing was Alanisa Bumswin's incident at Restagush, because it was filmed in our community, and I knew people in the film, so it was kind of like known as stars, even though it was a documentary. And I had a pretty, I realized in retrospect, I had a pretty lucky upbringing to be able to see my community represented on screen, because it never felt like an anomaly. But those are the two that I remember seeing on screen: Chief from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Alanisa's film Incident at Restagush.
Okay, very important work, Alanis. DEVERY, Tim?
Yeah, I feel that, you know, growing up, there was a lot of, honestly, whitewashing within the Indigenous films, or the films that I've seen, you know, which is why I think it's important now that we're changing the narrative, and then the relationship again that we have with film in the past, because I've only seen, recently have seen, you know, Indigenous films made by Indigenous people. I was lucky enough to go to the Imaginative Film Festival last year, when we were allowed to go out and, you know, see movies. And I think that now more than ever, it's so important to get away from the stereotypes that we have seen in the past. Also, I've just watched Blood Quantum, and it was great.
Right? Oh my gosh. Yeah, what you mentioned, Tim, like, you know, a lot of the Indigenous films, well, Indigenous presence that I saw were usually like historical, you know, buckskin and feathers on horseback. Like Dances with Wolves, I think, was the first thing as a kid that I saw where I saw like Ongwehome people. But I think the first Indigenous film that I saw was Dance Me Outside. And that was the first time I was like, whoa, we can be more than just, you know, in the past. What about you, Devery?
I was a 90s kid. Well, I am a 90s kid. And so I remember watching Indian in the Cupboard, and I didn't even realize that like that was supposed to be representative of us. And so I just remember being a fan of it, and I thought this was like this other thing. I didn't like, I was really young, and so I didn't realize the connection that like that's who we were supposed to be according to like Western society and everything. And like I work as an actor, and I also like write and direct and produce now, but I basically like with Rhymes for Young Ghouls, which I did with Jeff, that was the first time I'd done a live action project where I like played my own ethnicity. Because everything else was like not Indigenous specific, and if it was, then it was like they would get white people and brown them up and all of that. So it was before I had done Rhymes, the only other project I'd done was Degalazar's animated series By the Rapids, and that was like Ganyet Dio Horn was in it, like she was playing Hazel, and so that was my actual community, Gahnawage, which means by the rapids, that was represented in an animated form, and I had like a bit part in that. But that was the first time I was like, oh wow, there's like Ngwehue actors who are telling our stories. And other than that, it was working with Jeff, and I didn't realize that it was possible. And then once that happened, I was like, I didn't realize how rare of an experience that was. And I think I was kind of like, I don't know, chasing the dragon of like, oh, I'm gonna go do these other films and there's gonna be like native writer directors behind it. And that just wasn't the case for a couple of years. So
yeah,
it's been an interesting process.
Yeah, I remember Indian in the cupboard, Little Bear, wasn't he Ganyet Geha Mohawk? He said Uskanunda in the movie.
Flint Eagle, that's who played him.
Yeah, but I remember he said a Mohawk word and they were talking about the Iroquois anyway. Okay, so yeah, we touched on a lot of things, and I feel like this conversation's gonna like keep looping back. We're all touching on the same points. But in terms of cinema, what do you think defines Indigenous cinema, whether that's movies or also TV? Is it, you know, starring Indigenous people? Is it, you know, Indigenous directors and producers? Or
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
Like, is it still an Indigenous story if it's, say, like created by like, you know, somebody not Indigenous, but there's still an Indigenous storyline?
No, I don't think it is personally. Go ahead, Tim.
No. I was just going to say, I think that, you know, if you're going to tell an Indigenous story and not have an Indigenous, you know, team backing it, then, I mean, that's problem number one. You know, go to the people who know the history and be respectful of that. Go ahead, Jeff.
I totally forgot what I was going to say.
Oh my God, sorry.
I also agree with that. Because I work as an actor and I see breakdowns of projects, I consider Ngwehue stories to be when there's a core creative team who is representative of the culture that they're portraying. Otherwise, it's just a non-native story with native storylines or characters or actors in it. But I think it has to be of the team in order for it to be a native story.
I agree. I believe in, you know, the expression "nothing about us without us." You know, so if you're going to create something about our communities or our identities, we need to be included from the beginning. Jeff, any thoughts? Like, what defines or sets Indigenous cinema apart from something else? Is it always about culture and tradition, or can it just not be about that at all?
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say. It doesn't need to be cultural specific, because the fascination with the ceremonies and a lot of the more dramatic things about being Indigenous, I think that's what attracts non-native viewers, but it might not necessarily be the stories that Native people want to tell.
Yeah.
I know for me, I wanted to do a zombie movie. That's really all it was. I just wanted to do a zombie film. I didn't want to do anything political, but there needed to be some sort of specific thing about my particular zombie film beyond they're just natives and zombies in the same movie. There needed to be some sort of hook to it. So we thought it could be a great narrative for colonialism, and everything just kind of fell into place. And then from that point on, you're almost pulling your punches and trying not to be heavy-handed. Yeah. And that really had nothing to do with anything Micmac specific culturally wise beyond the res culture and the language. And for me, that's always been a a touchstone for the culture in film language. There's been Micmac in every single one of my films, and that's always been the way that I include where I'm from in my films. But I think the cool thing about it is that it's really flexible. So I find you could add Micmac or Mohawk or whatever it is that you speak in any film, no matter where it's set, and no matter the context, you can add the native language in there. So I always find it's a good way to add a piece of your culture without really compromising the views of the film. And that's really what you're trying to do as a creator. You're trying to balance your own creativity with the respect you have about where you're from and who you are.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when you first became conscious or aware of activism and justice, or the lack of justice? I know for myself, growing up in Six Nations, there are a lot of things that happened, historically and throughout my life that I've witnessed. But the biggest thing for me was the land claims dispute between the town of Caledonia and Six Nations, and that really changed me. Like, it impacted me. I remember when it started. I remember when the mass text messages went out that there was something happening, and everybody went there, and it changed me because I originally wanted to just to be a writer, to go to journalism school, but it shifted my focus. And it still influenced me today. And that's the moment I realized that I could do something and I could have a voice, and I really wanted to make a difference. What was the thing in your life, for all of you, that made you become aware of, activism in relation to our communities?
I'll go. When I first, because I think that was a two-part question. So the first part is like, when did you first realize? And for me, I grew up in Kahnawake, which is bordering Montreal, and I grew up like in the legacy of the 1990 Oka crisis. And I remember going to gymnastics. I used to be like a competitive gymnast, and I was going to gymnastics when I was maybe like 6 or 7. And there was this girl who was being not nice to me. And my mom said, okay, I'm going to speak to her mother. And her mother was this French woman, and she was completely disrespectful and wouldn't give her the time of day. And she was just like, she's probably a rock thrower. And I didn't know what that meant.
Oh my God.
And it was because during the crisis in Whiskey Trench, because of the blockade, and this is for people who don't know, because of the blockade, people weren't able to pass back and forth between Montreal and Kahnawake through the Mercier Bridge, but they opened it up for elders and women and children who needed medical attention, and they let them through, but the media tipped off the public, who was really angry, and they had these huge rocks that they threw at the cars, and a man ended up dying of a heart attack during it, and it was a really awful event. And this person, my mom was saying this woman was probably a rock thrower, and she was probably racist. And so that was the first time that I had considered that there was like a different experience between me and this little French girl in Montreal. But I hadn't, and I always knew that there was a rift between Montreal and Kahnawake, but I didn't know the details of it. And that was like the first time it had occurred to me, or to ask, or that there was that difference. And also, when I first decided to be involved, like, my community is like very much political, and I was kind of always involved, but when I made the decision to become more involved in the film industry was, well, it's funny, Jeff also worked there, but he worked at the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal before, and then I also ended up working there. And it was when I decided to begin writing and directing that I combined my experience in working at the shelter. Also, it was the time when Stephen Harper was still Prime Minister, and he was ignoring the international issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I had like seen a client of mine who had ended up on that list. There's another woman from my community, Tiffany Morrison, who's ended up on the list of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So it was that moment where I decided to like connect the two pieces of film as well as like activism in relation to our communities, and move forward in this medium with that. But other than that, I'd always been politically involved and involved in activism within my community.
Yeah, I think going off of that, you know, for me, it was definitely when I was younger, you know, I grew up off of Mwapakek. But we would, ever since I was a kid, we would go. And I remember having friends over, and my mom, who I lost my mother in 2013. And she was like a proud Mi'kmaq woman. She was right up until she passed. She wanted me to, you know, learn the language and be very close to the culture. So she would collect things from the reserve and like put them on display at the house, like decorate the house with them. And I remember people coming over and kind of just, you know, making fun of those things and making fun of like the powwows and the way of the, you know, they would say we would scream and all of that. And just being like totally not educated. Even myself, I wasn't, you know, with everything. And it wasn't until, you know, she passed away in 2013, which is when I decided to move to Toronto to, I actually went to TFS. Yeah, I went and, you know, I wanted to, you know, I wrote this film that I had just gotten in through the Imaginative and Netflix grant that I'm going to make later this year. And it's all about like reclaiming that heritage and reclaiming not only for myself, but for my mother. And yeah, I just think that is where I stand with it right now.
Tim, we've already mentioned before, you know, missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is an awful atrocity, a genocide, a femicide against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit folks. You directed this past year,
Yeah, back in February,
music video for the Indigenous rock band Crownlands. Actually, I think we'll play a clip right now. If Yas can play clip 1 from End of the Road by Tim Myles, just to start off, and then we'll talk.
There is a 720-kilometer stretch of road where over 40 cases of disappearances or murder have taken place. All of the victims women, many of them Indigenous. It is known as the Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is part of a larger nationwide crisis. Unfortunately, the history of authorities failing to investigate suspicious deaths makes it nearly impossible to know exactly how many lives have gone unaccounted for. The missing are our matriarchs, our queens, our kin, our givers of life. We owe them answers, and we owe them action.
So I had been approached by Universal, actually, the producers at Universal Music, and they had asked me to pitch on this music video for Crownlands. And Cody, who is the vocals, is also Mi'kmaq. And so they really wanted an Indigenous director. I had a co-director, his name was Alex Smith, who works with Universal, but they wanted, you know, this, you know, obviously what we're talking about before, like representation, and they wanted a voice, like an Indigenous director, an Indigenous voice. So I did a pitch for them, and we cast an all Indigenous cast of dancers. And we went up into Northern Ontario. Half of it was shot in BC, and then half was shot actually on the Highway of Tears. So there's like aerial footage of the highway. And then for the dancing, everything that I guess you'll see maybe if you play another clip, but it's a dancing piece. And there were 5 Indigenous dancers, and the lead choreographer, Tanisha Richards, she taught the girls the dance the day we were shooting.
Wow.
Yeah, they learned that like while we were setting up.
Wow.
Yeah, it was beautiful to watch. Just like it was freezing in like February, and they were all in these red dresses and moccasins, and the fact that they had like just learned this dance, because it was on such a tight turnaround, you know, like music videos are incredibly fast paced. And so they were like kind of just, you know, braving this cold for hours on end and just dancing their heart out for, you know, to pay tribute. And it was beautiful. Like, I remember we were on this road and it was just so dark. It was just all like forest and desolate, you know, fields. And we just had these two big speakers and they were just like blasting the song. And then like, as soon as the song came on, like the girls just like fully got into it. And it was just like, I was like tearing up behind the monitor. It was incredibly beautiful. And I'm just like honored to have been a part of it, really.
Yeah, it is really incredible. Let's have a look at it. The second clip featuring the dancers.
On this highway of tears, when all this darkness dissipates. At the end of the road, you're gonna say, now look at me. Gotta run away. Stolen sisters in the night, reaching to the ground below. When the lightning strikes, when thunder shakes us all. When all this darkness dissipates. At the end of the road, you're gonna say, now look at me. Gotta run away.
That is absolutely astounding that they learned that day and they danced in February in the
It was
cold.
freezing. I mean, we
Oh
had
my
obviously like we had blankets and everything, but and like heated places, but yeah, it was very cold and it was half interpretive as well. So they really added their own flair to it. We had specific beats that we had to hit, and but yeah, they just brought it. It was really dope.
Yeah. Can you tell us the significance of the red dresses?
Yeah, so the red dresses, they're, you know, the kind of staple into the missing and murdered Indigenous women. You know, they're a symbol of the spirits of the women who have not been found, to spirit folks as well. And I first found out about everything a long time ago, back in like 2014 when I just moved here, and I was walking along Ryerson campus, and they had all of the red dresses hanging in the trees, and I just thought it was like it's such a beautiful way to portray such a devastating tragedy. So it was really important that we obviously got the dresses for the video.
Yeah, it's very striking. That's the Red Dress Project, created by the artist. The artist mentioned that they chose the color after speaking with an Indigenous friend who told her that red is the only color that spirits can see and is a way of calling the spirits of missing and murdered women and girls back to their loved ones. It really was a moving video. Thank you for making that. And I'm glad that Crown Lands had that track. You mentioned also, Tim, that you got a lot of feedback. You heard, comments from people after the video was released, from people who were affected by missing and murdered Indigenous women. Can you speak a bit more about that?
Yeah, it was, being a young director, you read the comment section of things that you make, and you read the feedback. I mean, I'm learning not to do that, but
mistake.
I know. I was just like, I gotta go look. But yeah, I'm slowly learning not to. But for this, it was actually very beautiful to read. You know, many young people actually had reached out and said, you know, my sister, my mother, my mother's sister, aunts, you know, matriarchs have been lost to this national tragedy. And there was this one message that I got from this young woman in Halifax, Mi'kmaq, who she just said, you know, she said, thank you for giving us a voice and giving them some recognition on like a media stage, because like you said before, KILEY, you know, it hasn't really been shown in art too much like that. And I mean, I didn't want to be the one to you know, take all the credit for it, because I mean, it was such a big group project. The dancers, the producers, Tanya Tagak actually was the narration in the beginning, and she's just such a badass. And I was just so excited that she wanted to hop on and help us out with that opening monologue. That was actually written by Sage Wright, who's our producer. She's an Indigenous producer as well. She does documentaries, and yeah, it was a really great collective piece.
Wow, I didn't know that was Tanya Tagak at the beginning.
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Do you follow her on Twitter? She's hilarious.
Yeah, I follow her.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you again for doing that work now, Goa. So like myself and Tim, DEVERY is an actor, but also a filmmaker. DEVERY made a short film in 2017, I believe, called Ray, which is based on her mom's upbringing on the res in the 70s. So let's take a look at the clip 3 by DEVERY Jacobs, where Ray looks forward to the birthday party her mother promised. But as the day continues, Ray watches as her mother's mental illness begins to overtake her as their responsibilities of parenting get reversed.
Right. Good.
Stop.
It's
my birthday.
That's true. How old are you turning, my girl?
7.
I think you're too shrimpy to be 7. I think you're turning 6.
No, 7.
I don't know.
7.
I can't hear you.
7.
How? I can tickle you. Hello? Hi. Yes, this is Ray's mother from school. Yeah, we're having a birthday party tonight for her, and I was just wondering if you guys might be available. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Bye. Yeah, it's on the reserve. Well, do you think you might be able to just do that next weekend? And because Yeah, we forgot to send the invitations out. Yeah, no problem.
This film also I found very moving for me. I related to it, you know, seeing parenting depicted in this way. Gawanahale, correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems like it's a pretty personal and maybe vulnerable film for you. What motivated you to tell the story?
I grew up very close with my mother, and this was based on her experience being a young girl in the community. And a lot of people actually recommended that I don't act in the project as well. And I don't know, there's like a specific thing with female filmmakers who are also actors and being in their projects. But I was like, you know what, Taika Waititi can do it, and boy, I can do it in my short film. And for me, it was important to play my grandmother and the combination of her sweetness with being overwhelmed with being a parent, having a child at such a young age. And I was the same age as my grandmother was when I shot that, as when my mother was 7 years old. So for me, it was personal. And in my community, I shot that in Kahnawake, and it ended up being shot on Mother's Day, which was significant, but also my mom owns a flower shop in the community, and she was so mad that I couldn't help her out during the busiest time of the year because I was shooting this film. But yeah, it was very personal, and when she finally closed up shop, she was able to come back to set and like watch on the monitor, and she ended up getting emotional and having to leave. But yeah, it was just kind of like a love letter to my Ista, my mother, and my grandmother, and like in everybody trying their best in the community.
Yeah. You also mentioned, I think in the description of the film, that it was a depiction of mental health struggles. How do you feel about, you know, depicting that or speaking to mental health, which a lot of people deal with, I myself included, but especially in our communities? What was that experience like, having that part of the story?
I actually toned it down a lot. You saw more of her name's like Ista on it, which means mom. You see more of Ista's mental health in previous drafts and previous cuts of what ended up being on screen, but instead I wanted it to be more about Ray and her experience and what it looks like from a child's point of view, having a parent who has mental illness. So I just wanted to sprinkle in a couple of hints about that. My grandmother has schizophrenia, and that's something that runs through my family, and so that's also played into the parental role reversal, where it's like Ray who ends up taking care of Ista, and there's moments of like that dance of back and forth. But I guess that was for me, it was important to still have that depiction in there, to show that it's not something that's necessarily scary. I know that a lot of people in films depict mental illness as like this murderous, like evil person who sees spirits and things like that. And it's like, while that can be true, it doesn't mean that you have to be afraid of people with a mental illness. They're still people we love. They're still like trying their best, whether they're diagnosed and treated or not.
Yeah, that was a very tender and loving way to depict it. And you're absolutely right. You know, there are varying degrees of like mental health realities that we all deal with, but, you know, we're all adapting and doing our best when it comes to parenting. It was a very beautiful film.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. So Devery, you've worked a couple of times with Jeff Barnaby, starring in Rhymes for Young Ghouls. That was both of your first time collaborating together, correct? And you also, and you were also in Blood Quantum, which we'll get into in a minute, but let's talk a bit more about Rhymes for Young Ghouls. As with how Tim's video, music video really dealt with missing and murdered Indigenous women, there's like another huge horror that our people deal with, Indigenous people deal with, and that's like the horrific legacy of trauma from residential schools. So let's look at a clip from Rhymes for Young Ghouls. clip 4, please. Yes.
I'm taking over on the runs.
Fuck, Joseph. Did you not just hear me? You've got paper on you too. Your name still rings out. You don't think the townies know that you're here? Damn, didn't they teach you anything in prison?
This ain't the life I wanted for you, Ayla.
He's gonna get himself rolled just to bring all this shit down, Ayla. Papa's already looking at him.
Take it easy. I can do a dry run with him today just to let him know what it is we do.
Yeah. I know, my brother.
My father's not what anyone would call a good man. More like a man who did good things for wrong reasons and wrong things for good reasons. Joseph liked to fight. The story goes that my father pitied the white boy and intervened. But the truth, really, he just wanted to work on his brawling. My father offered his hand to Popper, but there was already hate in the boy's heart. He gave my father up to the priests, as would the rest of the boys that beat him.
Would you please teach it to Joseph here?
And in showing such diligence, began his asshole training in earnest.
Vespers is the evening prayer.
And it went on like this.
So this film also was incredible in the way of taking on something and really just, going there and exploring it. But in such a way, I felt like Rhymes for Young Ghouls did an incredible job at not just showing, the plight or the harsh, the difficult realities a lot of Indigenous people and communities deal with, but also showing the roots and the causes of it, and how, like Joseph, Ayla's father in the story, we're all still dealing and coping with the repercussions from residential schools and intergenerational trauma. Whereas I think a lot of depictions, like racist, stereotypical depictions of Indigenous people in film throughout the history of cinema, have just shown the problem, but not the underlying systemic structures that leads to our communities being victimized and disenfranchised and decimated. So, Jeff, what brought you to touching on this topic, and also another huge atrocity that a lot of communities and people deal with?
You kind of touched upon it already, where I wanted to draw a line between the actions and the cause. And if you look at the first scene in that film where they're sitting on the hood of the car, Ayla's drawing and her uncle's drinking, you can see the residential school right in the background, and you're seeing damaged Native people and residential schools on screen for the first time in Canadian history, and it's nothing. People haven't really explored this idea of intergenerational trauma, this idea that you can be damaged by something that you didn't experience firsthand just by virtue of being raised by the parents who did experience it. And 1976, the year it was set, I mean, that was the year I was born. It was the 100th anniversary of the Indian Act. I mean, there was a lot of significant things around that particular date. And for me, I really latched onto this idea that there had to have been a person around that time that was done with it, that wasn't going to take it anymore. And I, from that point on, wanted to tell the story from the perspective of a young girl, and for no other reason other than I felt like if it were going to be anybody to take that stand, it would have been a woman. It just made sense in my head from the experiences that I've had with the women in my life growing up on a reserve. It was just like, you know, if somebody was going to do this, if somebody was going to pull down like the criminal enterprise that were residential schools, it would be a res girl. So I just kind of took that idea and I ran with it, and that's how we got Ayla. And it was really a character film. It wasn't like I was trying to hang my ideas off of the residential school experience. It was kind of the opposite. I was trying to hang my ideas off of Ayla's character, and it was just what would happen if we took this rowdy res girl and we dropped her in 1976 with a really sadistic Indian agent trying to with her life. I wonder what she would do. And that's how Rhymes was born, just from Ayla's character. And it was weird because I kind of had to fight to get DEVERY cast. They weren't convinced. Yeah. Somebody said she was too pretty. And I wanted a res girl. I wanted somebody that grew up on the res. I wanted somebody that had that lived in experience. And I thought she would look too old, actually, because she was 19. You were 19 at the time, right? And Ayla was 15. But when I met her, like, you don't see it here, but DEVERY's actually tiny. She's like a tiny girl. So when I saw her, it was, it was exactly what I pictured. All this gigantic energy in this tiny person that represented all this history and strength of and survival without really doing it in an overt way. And from that point on, once you built all built all that foundation, it was just a matter of kind of making it a res Halloween story and leaning into the genre, making it entertaining, making it film, making it cinematic. And that's really the philosophy that we took with Vines for Young Ghouls. You know, we imbued it with all this history and culture, and then we told a really basic story, a revenge story. And we framed it around a young Native girl. And it was nothing that I didn't experience growing up, but it was weird to see the reaction to it because everybody thought it was like this big revolutionary film, but it was just stuff that I kind of experienced on the res growing up. And it was weird. It's still weird to a certain extent to see the reaction to it. You know, the biggest thing for me when we did Vines for Young Ghouls was how many people had no idea what residential schools were.
What?
That's what blew me away. That's what blew me away with Vines for Young Ghouls. As a matter of fact, the title cards that you see at the beginning of the film were put there specifically to inform the audience that there was a period in time in Canadian history. Last residential school closed in the 90s, by the way. So when we say Canadian history, we're talking like, you know, Fresh Prince was still on the air. So it wasn't that long ago that residential schools finally closed, but nobody knew about it. So we ended up having to put in that passage at the beginning of the film, which was lifted straight from the Indian Act, and inform our audience before they actually saw the film. And I was like, oh, did you make that up? I was like, no, we lifted it verbatim from the Indian Act. It was basically the plot of the movie.
That's incredible. Frightening that people, aren't aware of it. I encounter that a lot. People not knowing, like the last residential school closed in 1996, I think, and yeah. So, and the thing with this film, like there are so many clips I wanted to show, like your work, Rhymes for Young Ghouls is so cinematic. It's so beautiful. There's so much imagery that's just like really cool. But I wanted to choose a clip that really just highlighted how it impacts people, our communities. And Ayla is such a great, amazing female character. DEVERY, I didn't know you were 19 when you made that. You look so baby faced. You look like you could be 15. You mentioned, so this was your first lead role in a breakout role, and you mentioned this was a character you could really sink your teeth into. But more than that, your character inhabits or inherits all of this family and community pain and grief. You mentioned before that this story was close to you and your family's experience. So was doing it triggering in any way, or was it kind of like an outlet for healing?
I've mentioned my mom before, and she's like a huge influence, and I like playing Ayla. I definitely used my mom as one of the references. And I remember, Jeff, you also gave me a list of other references. There was like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, there was Hit Girl from Kick-Ass, there's Andrea Arnold's Fish Tank was one of them. And those were great references for like in terms of tone, but I think in terms of just like understanding history and understanding who this character is, I had to like look inward more than I had to like do external research, just because it was like, I know this girl, like Jeff, when even in Blood Quantum with Joss, I'm like, that's my mom, those are my aunties, that's my dada, that's like, and you're absolutely right in terms of like our cultures being centered around women and the women being the people who get things done. Are women and Two-Spirit and queer people. And yeah, especially like with Ayla and Joss in these movies. So that was like, I didn't have to do a ton of research in that aspect. And also, I'm gonna jump back to what we were saying earlier, because we were talking about Tanya Tagaq, and like I've seen on her Twitter that she went to a residential school in high school.
What?
Like she, who is alive now, who is a young person, like even she went to residential school. So it's definitely not something that's ancient history. People are like, forgive and forget, it happened so long ago. Like she went to school.
Yeah, people love to act like it was hundreds of years ago, or like, you know, it was so far in the past. But the fact that we were born or we were alive when this was going on, it's just, it's gross.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move into the next clip. There's so many things I wanted to ask, and there's so many things we could talk about. Let's move into Blood Quantum. This is a bit of a longer clip, but I wanted to commit to playing the entire scene because there's just so much happening on the surface, but also below the surface. So, Yaz, can we please play the clip from Blood Quantum?
Oh, to you who are highly favored.
No shit.
Hey, Doris, that's my little brother, so...
Native Zac Efron.
3 more mouths to feed. Yay.
Oh, good grief, Charlie Brown.
You know, the girl, this guy and his kid are stragglers.
Hey, I know you too.
Make that 2 more mouths to feed. The girl's sick.
Welcome to our palliative care.
Put her down.
What's going on here? I haven't done anything wrong.
You're bringing your sick here. What's right about it?
My little girl got injured, that's all. She needs help. I was told I could get help here.
Who told you?
Oh, wait a minute. We could just go back and leave, or use one of the boats. We don't need...
Oh!
Hey!
Charlie, we barely know this guy. Fuck, Lysol, settle down.
Fuck, you just said it, man. You don't know this guy. How do you know that this fucking town he didn't come here with this refugee Pollyanna act? He plant this infected bitch right on our doorstep. You brought her here.
What?
Take this knife, slide it in her ear, and stir it around.
Do you know what we had to do to get here?
No, and I don't give a fuck either. You do it up or I'll do it for you.
What if my baby's born sick? You gonna shoot us too?
I do what I have to do.
Whoa, 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 easy, boys.
Broke my dipstick. You owe me a blow.
When they're gonna Charlie again, I'll fucking kill you.
Joseph!
Alan, what the fuck are you doing?
I was checking for bites like you told us to. Or do you want to fucking open up the floodgates and let them stay?
I think you Look at all of you. Get your fucking shit together!
What are you doing? How the fuck do you even keep arranging this?
We're supposed to be helping people. That's what I'm doing.
We're not supposed to be doing anything. We're supposed to be surviving.
Oh, gee, Bennett. What
What are you guys talking about? Speak English.
Jas, Kisian Tomada. Pasik, Ebedej.
Speak English!
Your girl's been bit. She can't come in here. She'll put everyone in danger. You should have said something.
I heard that you could cure bites here. I should have been honest about that up front. But look, he's been bit.
She stopped on her breathing.
Everyone inside. You need to move away from her. Go inside. You're not gonna want to see it come back.
You're especially not gonna want to see what he does with that axe.
Gonna make them take that shit down. Not neighbor.
Okay, so this film is so incredible, and it was so difficult choosing like which clips to like, oh God, like there are so many like cool, awesome, entertaining, fun scenes and imagery in the movie. There's a lot of gore and of course zombies and action, but I chose this scene because there is so much packed into it, and there's so many like images and symbology and allusions and sort of like winks towards so many things that have happened in history. We see Indigenous communities helping out struggling white newcomers, in the form of these survivors who bring sickness and blankets. There's like distrust and deception, and there's images of barricades and blockades and oil drums and like burning oil, and there's a lot of like defending and protecting, like their territory. So there's so much packed in there. For a viewer, like I knew what you were doing and what was going on like below the surface. And if people don't, then they should, learn real history. And there's a lot that has been said about this film, Blood Quantum, in, how it relates to like unpacking colonialism. We could talk about, colonialism and intergenerational trauma all day long, but let's bring it to what we're going through now. Blood Quantum has really been elevated in its subject matter. It's a movie that's become so much more timely and urgent and relatable, because of like the nightmare horror we've all been living this past year. So Jeff, Blood Quantum in relation to, what's depicted in the film, like a virus outbreak and zombies, and it's like, wow, kind of like very, very timely. So how has that changed for you? Like, what function does this film, horror film, or any film have? What function does it serve in speaking to, things we're all going through?
I think it's almost a longing to return to the innocent days where you can walk into a theater and watch somebody get their guts ripped out and just be fine with the world. But now you can't go into a theater, and it seems like everything you watch on screen reminds you that you're in a lockdown, you're in a pandemic, and you're kind of drifting towards a political right that feels more like a fascist dystopia, and all these things that are weighing on your mind. When I made Blood Quantum, I knew it was going to be explicit about retelling the tale of colonialism, but I didn't know how specific, because I knew it was going to reflect on what's going on now, because I think one of the misconceptions about colonialism is that it was localized to that one period of time, whereas it's kind of been an ongoing process, and the process is exploit all the resources until they're gone. That's colonialism. So it's taken a few hundred years, but we're kind of in the process of realizing that it's not going to work as a political structure or a means of prolonging the human race. So I got lucky, really. It's to say, but if the pandemic didn't drop, I don't think the ideas that were in there bubbling below the surface would have really been that obvious to average viewer, because it came out right before the pandemic hit by maybe a couple of months. Like, it got released in September, the pandemic really dropped in February, March, and nobody goes to the movies in December, and it was going to be released in theaters in the spring. So right before that happened, like literally right before, days before, we went into lockdown. And it became obvious because what the pandemic did was it made all the social issues that are present in our day and age that much more prominent. It exacerbated everything. And you kind of realize that the colonial mechanism, whatever you want to call it, it's just been this one great big circle, and it just changed names and went from like colonialism to capitalism to late stage capitalism, whatever they're calling it now. And I think Blood Quantum, by virtue of making this comment on the initial colonization of Canada, it almost inadvertently made a comment on the time where you're looking at how the disease of smallpox and all these other diseases helped the colonization of the Americas. And you're kind of seeing it play out in the undoing of that same structure, because a lot of weird things happen. Like, you realize that the essential workers of our communities aren't, people above garbage men and the mailman. So it made us kind of reevaluate everything that we were experiencing as a society. And it's weird to think of all going on while you're watching people getting sawed in half, and guy gets his bit off and all this other weird stuff. But again, it happening in a pandemic, I think just it really elevated the content of the film, and it made it obvious that it wasn't just talking about the colonization of America, but the ongoing struggles of what everybody's been going through. They're just framing it through this zombie vehicle to turn it into entertainment and make it a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, and you did that so masterfully. When I saw Blood Quantum when it premiered last year at Imaginative, we saw it in the movie theater. It was incredible, but it meant something different then than when I rewatched it now. I was like, oh shit, this is like, it takes on a different meaning. I feel like this has become also a pandemic film that is right up there with like Contagion. And it's, it really serves a function. Eli Roth said that horror films are great at making things that are difficult to discuss, discussable. And it gives us context to talk about subjects that are awful and painful. And these are things you can do in scary movies like zombie movies that really allow us to go to those places and have that catharsis and that release. And Stephen King also said that the best horror films, like the best fairy tales, manage to be reactionary, anarchistic, and revolutionary all at the same time. And I truly feel like Blood Quantum achieved that. It's really incredible film. If anyone watching hasn't seen it, you must see it. Watch everybody's work here. So we're coming to the end. I have so many more questions, but we are going to open it up to the Q&A portion. So if anybody watching has any questions, they will be coming through in the chat. Jeff, also, do you anticipate your work, your future work, current work? Do you always see yourself touching on political, timely subjects? Can you separate being an artist from being an activist? Do you want to?
I don't think.
I haven't heard from you in a while.
Personally, I can separate it. You know, it's always the most important thing to me is always to have inclusive casting and, you know, inclusive crew. And not every film I'm going to make, you know, or all ideas I might have may not be from a political standpoint, but that doesn't mean that I don't, you know, always want to, enjoy those things, you know, like I find it really hard. Last year when I was in Imaginative, I did a music video I directed a music video for a Métis pop artist. Her name's Indigo. And it was shown at the festival, and there was an article written about it a few days later, and it was, you know, the video was great, but I'm not really sure what it had to do with Indigenous, or in, you know, where the Indigenous factor came into that. And then she went on to talk about how she looked into it and then found out that the director and the artist were both Indigenous, and how Indigenous film, you know, or Indigenous media in general can be in mainstream media, and what it means to be an Indigenous artist, an Indigenous filmmaker, Indigenous actor, anything, you know, it's up to you and what you want to do as the Indigenous person. You know, you don't have to be defined, and I'm still learning this myself, you know, like you don't have to be defined by anything that anyone thinks that you should say or should touch on. You know, it's your voice.
Yeah. There is something I consider all the time, you know, in terms of how I represent myself. I sometimes feel like a pressure to always like being trans and Indigenous and being a woman. I feel like, you know, I want to tell stories that are about my identity and my community, but sometimes I don't want to. Like, I want to create a story that has nothing to do with being Indigenous or my trauma or things I'm dealing with. You know, I maybe just want to create a film that is, I don't know, like a gothic romance set in the future in space.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be really amazing. So for all of you, when it comes to Indigenous representation, are there certain depictions that you strive to highlight and focus on, or any that you try to avoid at all? Or do you just not care? Like, do you just want to tell your stories? I guess my question is, do you feel a pressure to focus on certain things or to stay away from certain things because of, you know, stereotypes?
I don't care at all. I don't even think about that. I would have to, somebody would need to sit down and tell me what they are. Like, list them for me, because I don't even know what those would be. Like, what do you mean? What stereotypes? Like, you know, Native men scalping people? That'd be kind of cool to put in a movie, though. I wouldn't mind seeing that.
So, right
it's a great revenge film.
I don't really give it, to be honest. And you know what? I do to a certain extent, in that I'll go out of my way to make my films, or the characters in my films, almost anti-Indians, in that they embody none of the spirituality or villainy of the previous depictions of them in cinema. They're just these guys. A lot of them are too. They're just terrible men, or they're these women struggling against bigger, you know, things bigger than they are. So I don't even know how to answer that. because I think just by virtue of telling your story, you're gonna contradict a lot of those stereotypes anyway, because you don't go by what people tell you, you go by what you've lived. Well, I have anyway. I mean, that's been my approach to it. Like, the people that are in my films have crossed paths with me at some point in my life, either on a reserve or on a powwow trail. And I don't think I make political movies, which is kind of weird to say, right? I mean, if you see my films, you think that's what they are. Again, you're just talking about lived experience, but you're kind of being a little bit academic and artistic about it. So I don't really think I'm actively trying to be an activist or a political filmmaker. I think that context already exists, and you're going to engage it, regardless of whether or not you want to, or you make an attempt to avoid it, whatever, because you cannot control the reaction of what you're going to get from an audience. An audience today's audience are going to come in pre-programmed to a certain degree, because just by the reaction I got from Blood Quantum, a lot of it was, he didn't do enough with the subject matter, whatever the fuck that means. I mean, like, I don't know what that means, but that's what I heard a lot of. But I began to realize what they were talking about it wasn't native enough. I don't know exactly what that meant, like people with bow and arrows or doing ceremonies, like tobacco ceremonies over every zombie they kill. I don't know what they were talking. So I think you're going to be making political films just by virtue of the way audiences have been programmed to react to Native people. So you might as well control it and have fun with it, and, try to just subvert. It's just, you know what it is really? It's just another tool in the storytelling toolbox. All these illusions, all that cinematic history there, you can use it to add layers to what you're doing, because there's so much material there. You can start doing Native parody films of all the films that were made with Natives that came before, and you'd never run out of material. You'd be doing it for the rest of your life. I mean, if there was a platform for that, you can make money doing a show like that, you'd be doing it for the rest of your days. So I think you just look at it as part of the fun of being a Native filmmaker. Don't get crazy. Like, well, I'm not going to get into what I mean, but I think there's a point where you can make your work about that, where you find yourself always, reacting to how white people have reacted to you. And at some point that just gets fucking lazy. And what's the story? What's the perspective? How does that change how it's being told to the audience? I mean, that's Native cinema. It's not like, people protesting pipelines or, trying to get the peyote across the border or whatever people think Native issues are. It's whatever you've lived in as an experience as a Native person in this day and age. I mean, that's what Native stories are. There's no feathers or drums attached. It's basically your experience and how your world reacts to you.
I remember when Rhymes went to Germany in Munich, and Germans love Native spirituality, and they have their own powwows, and there's whole communities that speak Ganyatgaha, who speak Mohawk, they're really out there. And so we showed Rhymes there, and it was within 15 minutes, when people realized that it wasn't a drum and feather movie, half the theater walked out.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think when it comes to being filmmakers and telling our stories, I agree. Jeff, as opposed to getting caught up on expectations or worrying about the reaction, I just say, just do you, and the audience response or public response is a personal problem. That's a point I'm getting to. We do have some questions in the Q&A. So something, let me see. Okay, the first one I see here is, if you were granted the same high budget and you had the same money to make films as white men, for example, for your next project, what would it be? So if you got the support and the money, Tim, Devery.
I personally would turn Little Bird, which is the short that I'm writing for Imaginative, I would turn it into a feature. And I would go back to Newfoundland on the Wapakek First Nations and hire, do everything back home. And yeah, it would be the feature.
And that's great. It's important. A film about loss and grief and coping with that, which is the story I think is needed. Exploring grief. Devery.
I'm developing a series right now called which is the Hoof Lady, which is based on the legend of the Hoof Lady in my community, where like these women are sent back to earth as hoof lady spirits, and they're meant to like right the wrong that was done to them. So it's kind of loosely based on missing and murdered Indigenous women, but it's not actually having, it's not outrightedly saying it. And so it's kind of going on that journey with these like ass-kicking spirits, and it's like in the same vein as like a native queer Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so I would want to like infuse that and just like have some fun while also having those conversations.
I would watch that.
Same. Those Hoof Lady stories scared me when I was a kid. I love it. Love scary stuff. What about you, Jeff? Unlimited budget. What would you make?
Brave Star.
Is that a project you're working on?
No, it's a cartoon from the 80s. How do you not know what Brave Star is? Oh my God.
I'm a 90s.
It was 89. It was maybe 89, 90. And it was about this Navajo, half white sheriff that goes to the planet New Texas, where they're mining, I forget what it's called. But he has to clean up the town. He's the native sheriff that needs to go clean up the town. So it's a Western in space about colonialism. And it's called Brave Star. And he has like a homicidal cyborg horse robot that talks to him and talks to his gun, 30-30. And the horse is kind of a psycho. And yeah, I've been wanting to make that forever. And I think if somebody handed me a whack of money. You know what the weird thing is? I think they were gonna do it for a while. I think it was part of that reboot of 80s, 90s nostalgic cartoons, like when they did Gem and the Hologram. They wanted to do. I think John Woo was attached, as a matter of fact, to do Brave Star, and it got as far as development, and it never really went anywhere. So I think Brave Star or Roadhouse reboot.
Well, if anyone can do it, it's you.
Conan.
Okay, question for Devery. What advice would you give to any aspiring filmmaker of color to tell their stories in any form of genre and storytelling, and to never give up?
Yeah, mute, Devery.
I'm just repeating the question. What advice would you give any aspiring filmmaker of color to tell
I'll read it to you again. It's a bit of a long question. Okay. What advice would you give to any aspiring filmmaker of color to tell their stories in any form of genre and storytelling, and to never give up? Yeah.
That's a tough one. I would say it's very similar to advice that I would give for acting, which would be like to do what creatively gets you off, like to focus on that and to like stay true to what your voice is and like what you want to create versus an idea of what you think other people would want. Yeah, and I feel like if you're letting like your own compass guide you, that like that won't steer you wrong, is how I've navigated my career and my life, and my as a filmmaker and as an actor. That would be my advice for people pursuing either of those career options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see. Question for all. There is much ado about diversifying the industry right now, and that's like obviously amazing and way, way, way overdue. But I wonder, as Indigenous filmmakers, do you sense real change on the wind as opposed to tokenism, performative allyship in the industry broadly?
No. Do you want a more elaborate answer?
I mean, that's poetic. No.
No, I do not. Well, as of right now, I mean, there's no native showrunners. There's no native directors with any real big budgets. There's no, yeah, I mean, all that stuff is being dangled out there and alluded to, but it hasn't really translated into anybody that I know getting jobs, or they're doing any specific kind of, native show that, that's written and directed by native people. I think there's, a couple of attempts out there, but I don't even know, to be honest, if you're really being honest, I don't even know if there's enough people in the industry to support something like that. All Indigenous crews and all Indigenous, I know there's enough people to support the creative side of it. And I think you would need to take a couple of risks on people. And I think that's really what you're talking about. That's the real debate, is when you're bringing this stuff up, you're asking people to take real risks. And the cinema that exists today is not about taking risks. It's about purchasing, intellectual property that's successful already and translating it to the screen. I mean, that's really what cinema's turned into lately. So you're really never going to deviate from that model, and to put natives in charge of an image that's been manipulated by white directors for the past 100 years, that's dangerous, and it takes a real risk. And who knows if, well, for a fact that not everybody is going to agree what's going to be said about the culture, or what kind of films are going to be made, because nobody's really used to seeing native people control their own imagery. Like it's just right now, it's tokenism. There's nobody really putting real money behind a big show. Everybody's kind of taking practice swings and seeing if there's something that's going to stick. So as of right now, no. You know what it needs? There needs to be a successful show, really. There needs to be a big show, either on television or in film, where people will get infatuated with natives again. It happened like in the early 90s, after Dances with Wolves. There was the fucking Indian and everything, but that it didn't really translate into anything. There's actually a sequel. There's a sequel to Dances with Wolves, but it never really translated into work for native storytellers. And then the Sundance film happened. The hell's the name of that movie by Chris Iyer?
Yeah,
Anybody remembers the movie? Smoke Signals. There you go.
Smoke Signals.
Smoke Signals happened, and you thought that was going to be the film that kicked the doors open, and now everybody's just kind of waiting.
Yeah, and I do feel okay. So right now we have Trickster on CBC, which is a mostly Indigenous-centered show with an Indigenous cast based on a novel by an Indigenous woman, Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson. The show was adapted and directed by Indigenous filmmaker Michelle Latimer. And all of this on, it's not on APTN, it's on CBC. Although there's only 6 episodes. What's up with that? I kind of feel like they were done dirty and they should have gotten like 10 to 12 episodes. Yeah. But who knows? Hopefully it's successful. What about you, Jeff, Devery? Are there any like real, authentic, progressive representations as opposed to just tokenism and performative allyship?
I think it's like it's grassroots organizations like BIPOC and companies like Imaginative who are uplifting these Indigenous voices and really trying to get us out there. And it's up to the bigger companies, you know, like you have like Netflix coming to Canada now, and Crave, and just, or production companies in general. It's up to them to follow suit with what these smaller led companies are doing, and to, you know, really lift people up in places of power where they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
I also agree. I think while we're seeing more projects, if you look at the back end, like the budget that these Ngwehunge led and created projects are like minuscule in comparison to basically like first time filmmakers who like whose dad is a producer, who went to like AFI and then get all the opportunities in the world. Like if you look comparatively, I think there's still a huge discrepancy, and even within Canada with like telefilm, where a lot of the money that's being given out to BIPOC filmmakers is the Talent to Watch program, where everybody's like clamoring over $150,000 to create a feature. And I'm involved in a couple Ngwehunge-led television series, but again, like it doesn't have the same kind of budget that other series would be. And I've been involved in like non-native specific projects where like the pay was much larger and I had a much smaller role. So I think it is about risk, and it is about people, because right now it feels like there's the tests happening where there's tokenism and people are saying like, yeah, we're on the precipice of a movement, and like this is the time for like BIPOC filmmakers, but there is also that air of like, but don't fuck it up, because then we won't give anybody else any opportunities after it. So there's a huge eye on our communities right now with lower budgets and with more pressure, and so I think that risk, like people need to take more of a risk in order for that change to truly happen, and it not just be a fad, and for us to like solidify our voices and our place in the industry.
Yep, I agree. I say that a lot, that, I feel like when it comes to funding projects, as an actor, I know roles usually go to actors who are bankable, or who can, make investors feel good that they're going to get a return on their investments. And, there is a lot of risk taken. And, as I say, at one point, someone took a risk on Leonardo DiCaprio and Margot Robbie. At one point, they were kind of like, ooh, we don't know it, but they were given a shot. Or, directors like, I don't know, Tarantino, Scorsese, at one point, someone took a risk on them. And we're not going to get a chance if somebody doesn't give us an opportunity and, I guess, take a risk on us. So that's really what we need. Less lip service support and more like money support.
Give us money.
Yeah, Ovista, come on. Okay, another question. Where is this? So, you are all strong with your self-identity. How can you pass that on? Have you considered, or would you consider, creating a film that addresses young Indigenous people who are struggling with their self-identity?
Absolutely.
In what way? Which identity are we talking about?
I feel like, even when it comes to Two-Spirit and, it's the queer community, which is the community I'm a part of, that representation is so important to see now more than ever, because we need to show the next generation of young artists that they can, their voices are important, and they can see themselves on TV and not be so, scared to be who they are. And I think it has gotten better, but I think we still have a way to go. I think, television, you have shows like, I was binging Girls, like Lena Dunham's Girls on HBO. That whole thing is just a bunch of, it was great, but it was, it's a bunch of white women in like New York who are upper middle class or whatever. So if you take a show like Girls or something along that vein of like, finding your identity and finding your heritage and everything, and just cast BIPOC actors, and show that they can have a story as well that younger people can look up to.
Mm-hmm.
I think also like diversity in stories is hugely important, where if you were to like look at cinema and be like, okay, what is white cinema? It's like you couldn't answer that, because it's like it really depends on the individual and their voice and their experience. And I think that I want to see as many types of Native films as there are Native people, and there's not like one way to be Ngwehwe. Like I want to see an urban Indigenous story, I want to see an Afro-Indigenous story, I want to see like stories of Two-Spirit people and like people who've been disenrolled, like tribal disenrollment, or people who've like undergone the 60s scoop and have been adopted out and are reconnecting to their communities. I want to see res stories. I want to see like basically like all of the different nations that we have. So I think just by encouraging the diversity of our experiences of the like almost 600 different nations that we're comprised of, will encourage all of our voices in those young people, and to say that like, if you have ties back to your community, that means that you're Ngwehwe and that experience is valid. Whether you were raised on the reserve or not, it's that matter of like connection to community and showing those different experiences.
Yep, that's an excellent point. We are not singular identities. Intersectionality and like the multifaceted, layered beings that we are need to factor into our storytelling also, as opposed to just being like one-dimensional Indians. There's a question here about, I guess touching on intersectional identity. So any advice for Black natives or natives looking to reconnect with their culture but are having a hard time finding their history?
Date somebody from the res.
What's that?
I said date somebody from the res.
That's one way.
I would also say to figure out which community you're from and to approach them, and I think it depends on like from case to case and person to person. But yeah, finding that connection back to your specific community is important, and is the pathway back to like that connection to identity.
Yeah, I am not mixed race, but I've spoken to people who were Black and Indigenous, and how much of a hard time it is, because it's like there's sort of what I've noticed in my community also is like sort of like this cultural policing of like whether or not you have both Indigenous parents, or if you have a white parent, then you're going to have a hard time, or if you're half, or if you grew up on the res versus off the res, if you're traditional versus non-traditional. There's so much gatekeeping that happens, but I also feel like if you and it's hard for people, not everybody has the privilege to have access to culture and community, even if they want to. Not everybody wants it, not everybody has it, but I do feel I think finding people similar to you, finding community, and then going from there, and as a group effort to help connect with each other.
And I do also recognize that there is anti-Blackness within our communities as well, which is a whole issue that like each of us have a responsibility to carry and confront within our own communities. And so that's something that part of that element is on us who are non-Black Indigenous people to advocate for Black Indigenous people within our own communities.
Yep, that's true, because as much as we all talk about our experiences of, racism against us, we within our communities are also, there's a lot of that happening. So another question. Let me see. As storytellers, do you see any value in exploring any historical alliances against colonial, hold on, let me just read this question. As storytellers, do you see any value in exploring any historical alliances against colonialism in Canada between Indigenous peoples and African peoples or transatlantic slave trade experiences?
I don't have any projects in the works at this moment. I did co-write a film in which I also acted in, which features a relationship between a Tamil refugee and a half Mohawk, half Iranian character who leaves the reserve for Toronto in pursuit of her estranged father who doesn't know that she exists. The film's called This Place, and I co-wrote it with two friends of mine, VT Naini, who is Tamil, and my other friend Gulshan Abdumole, who is an Iranian poet. And it draws parallels between, and also explores the differences and similarities between refugees who've come to Canada and Toronto, and also Ngoihuenaha, like Indigenous people who are from this territory, in a story that could only ever happen in Toronto. That's actually how I met you, KILEY, was you auditioned for one of the characters, Wardy, which like you blew me away, but there was like no way that you could play my mom.
I know, my agent sent me to audition as DEVERY's mom. I was like, her mom, I could play her sister, but you know, whatever. I think the role went to the right person, but that is the exact kind of like complex storytelling we need. And I cannot wait for that film to come out. You know, again, intersectional, multi-layered, complex characters and storytelling.
Which is reflective of my life living in Adirdundo, living in Toronto. Like that's, yeah. So as of this time, I'm not collaborating with any Black writers or creators yet at this time, but I am creating with other BIPOC and refugees who've come to Canada.
Yeah. I think that's all the questions in the Q&A. I'll just ask a couple more, then we can wrap up. You know, there's so many more things I want to ask. You know, when I get a chance to get together with other Indigenous, Ongoihoe, like Two-Spirit, queer filmmakers, I could just go on and on. But let's daydream and fantasize about the future. Where do you hope Indigenous cinema will go in 5 years and 10 years? What role do you want to have in that?
Wherever the Indigenous creators and artists want to take it. Again, it's completely up to the artist and the filmmaker at hand what they want to do. The biggest thing I think is to hire Indigenous and to hire BIPOC. That's where I want it to go.
Hire BIPOC.
Hire them.
Jeff, Devery, daydreams, fantasies about the future?
As a filmmaker, I'd love to make the stuff that I want to make, be passionate about the stories, like create passion projects. And then on the acting front, I want to be a Marvel superhero.
Yes, me too.
I don't know. I'm racking my brain about where I would want to see it go. I think really basic stuff now that I've been doing this for about 20 years. I think it's you just want to make a living. That's really it. And as of right now, I can't do that really. Not doing exclusively Native stories anyway. I think it would be nice to see some kind of parity with the amount of money Native filmmakers get versus their non-Native counterparts to tell the same stories. I think that's really, that's my big dream, pay equity. that's as high as my 40-year-old is aiming these days. Just, pay equity. If you can hit that mark, man, I think I've changed the world. I've made my peace. But it would be also nice. I've always looked at film as a kind of means to undo some of the damage that was done by residential schools and just by colonialism in general. I think it would be nice to see Native filmmakers incorporate their language more and their culture more to use as vehicles to tell their stories. And it doesn't necessarily mean telling traditional stories. I mean, they could be set in the future. They could be set, you know, in some alternate universe. I mean, I think it would be nice to see a cross section of traditional and modern values, more progressive values to move forward, because I don't think it's as simple as, you know, let the artist be themselves, because they have a community to represent. So regardless of whether you like it or not, when you're Native, if you're Mi'kmaq or if you're Mohawk, whatever the case may be, you reflect by your actions and by the stories you tell on the people that vouch for you. So yeah, it's complicated, but more money, it's a good start.
How many times do we need to say it?
Yeah.
More money. Yes, right? Tim, did you go? Did you mention anything? And it's okay if not.
No, there was back before when we were talking about identities, I just wanted to retouch on that really quickly. You know, I can't say something for like the Black Indigenous community, but growing up with an Indigenous mother and a white father, I always struggled with my identity and my being Indigenous. And it wasn't, you know, until later where I started to really dive into it, especially when my mom passed away, and just carrying on her like legacy of wanting to be a proud Mi'kmaq person. And it was actually in 2000, I graduated TFS in 2016, and I was offered to audition for Tales of an Urban Indian. And I was like so scared of the backlash that I would receive if I had gotten anything. So I had actually turned down the role, or not turn down the role, but turn down the audition, because I was so insecure about my own identity at the time. And now looking back at it, I was like, first of all, as an actor, like never turn down an audition. But that's just something that I think, you know, to go back to that question is to just like reconnect with that, reconnect with your roots and reconnect with your community that you came from, and don't feel that you're not enough because of, you know, how you look, or you know, if it, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. We are more than enough. You know, we were meant to be here. We were born for a reason. And I look forward to seeing all of the work and the important needed stories that you all will go on to tell. Last question. When it comes to the point when you're at the end of your life, may that be long and healthy, what do you want your legacy to be as a filmmaker or just as a storyteller and an artist? What do you want to be remembered for? Devery, you're having a reaction.
What a question.
It's what?
I said, what a question. I don't know. I guess I want to be known for doing good work and trying to push that needle forward and trying to make headway and open doors for as many Ngwehwe as I can who come after me and alongside me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me as well. I want to, you know, good work and uplifting voices that come after me. If I ever get into a position where I have any type of, you know, say in any aspect of film, or I would just want to know that the younger generation, that I have their back, and that, you know, when you, what is it, when you like walk through a door, leave it open for somebody else to come through, and yeah.
Get in, cousin.
Yeah, let's go. Come on, everybody.
Jeff, does intentional legacy factor into your work, or do you just do you?
No, I don't care at all. I don't. I'm just, you know, it's a great legacy, Alanis, because she's been doing it for so long.
Right.
That's what I want my legacy to be. It's like, how the did he do this for 40 years? Like, how did it not kill him? That's what I want my legacy to be. Like, yeah, these movies suck, man, but he did them.
Just gonna be a
She's
What?
an OG.
I said you're gonna
Yeah.
be
Yeah, I think just surviving, I think, would be a good legacy. And like I said before, just by virtue of being native and doing it, you're kicking down doors. So I don't really focus on that per se. I really lately it's focusing on money. It's like, who's paying me, how much, and what do I need to do? That's where my legacy is at these days. But I think, again, just surviving, just doing it. I mean, really, that's how you create a legacy. And I don't think it's going to be up to me what that's going to be. I hope it's positive, but I think, you know, just to be spoken of is good enough for me.
Yeah, sometimes just surviving and existing is radical enough, and that's a legacy. You know, we lived, we were here, and we leave our mark and we leave an imprint. And like what Devery said, you know, I believe in like Haudenosaunee teachings of like the 7 generations teachings, that everything that we do in our lifetime, all of our decisions and behaviors will affect the coming 7 generations. So I trust and believe, and I feel that all of the work that you're doing, Tim, Devery, Jeff, is going to have that impact, and it's going to not just change, you know, things for us here and now, but there's young ones watching us and being inspired. I'm inspired by all of you, and I truly, truly am excited about the future with you all in it. So Nyawakoa, thank you all so much for your time and your sharing and just being here and sharing space with us. And thank you to BIPOC TV and Film and the Toronto Film School. And I guess that's it. Onagiwahi, that's all for now.
Yawa KILEY.
Yeah.